Greetings, 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 good people. Welcome to day 16. We on day 16, y'all, of this 28-day Blackity Black History Month ancestral activation for Black liberation. On today, again, day 16, we are 2 days into our sacred resistance. The ancestors, the collective community ancestors that we can look to for wisdom and guidance around different ways that we can resist oppression, that we can resist colonization, that we can resist imperialism. And I may do a video, I probably will do a video at some point around the definitions of those things so that we can really understand what we're in, because we hear those words a lot, but don't necessarily really grasp the impact of it and how long it's been happening. But we're talking today in particular in the Sacred Resistance Week, ancestors, collective ancestors. We're talking in particular about Kwame Ture, who was born Stokely Carmichael, and also Tupac Shakur, because they had very similar um, ethos, if you will, their philosophies, and using the power of their words, their spoken words, to make an impact. So we're going to dig into that today. So if that kind of thing, if looking and understanding our collective ancestors and tapping into that wisdom, this series is all about that. And if that's your jam, definitely like, subscribe, and click that notification bell so that you know when I go live with these or even post other videos. And when you get that notification, and I've been saying this every day and I will continue to say it, use that as an indication, as a reminder to tap into yourself, to tap in with your ancestors, to tap into your own higher self, to tap into however you manage and work through your spiritual practice, to just tap in so that you can stay connected and stay having that guidance, that divine guidance, so that you know what moves to make, how to stay safe, how to prosper, how to thrive, how to not only survive but to thrive. Use that as a reminder to tap in for yourself, because we can listen to all the things, but until we embody any of these practices in our day to day as a way of living, it to an extent, it's for naught. Ancestors are always here protecting us and guiding us to the extent that they can, but it's when we engage with them and actively collaborate in this process that it really becomes powerful. So not only will that reminder let you know, hey, you can jump on and join us for these ancestral activations, but at a minimum, it can remind you to just tap in wherever you are and whatever you're doing. So, who am I? I am Barbara Ohuninifa. I am an author, a coach, and a speaker, and I work with Black women to help us recognize that we are beautiful, remember that we are powerful, and to be love. To be all of the beautiful love and nurturing and nourishing that we embody and give to everyone else, and everyone else comes to us for. And yet, the world has not been kind to us, especially in these last few hundred years. We could even argue a little bit longer than that, but we ain't gonna get into too much around history here. We deal with mostly more recent history, um, and so that's the work that I do. I have a one-on-one coaching program which you can read more about, or tap the link in the description box to learn more about. But today we're here talking about ancestral activation, and that's something that's for all of us. That's for all of us who are descended from enslaved Africans, no matter what part of the diaspora that we're from, and no matter what gender you identify as. All of us need to tap into this, no matter what your spiritual practices are, or even at a minimum, just learn about these ancestors, because what they did was incredible. It's transforming me as I go through the process of doing this research and packaging it up in a way where I can share it with you, telling their stories. It's doing a thing for me, and my greatest hope is that it can do something similar, if not the same thing, or if not more, for you as you listen and apply these principles and the wisdom that they left behind for us, to apply that in your life. Because again, we can get all the information, but until we bring it down into our bodies, into our experience, into the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and even just how we live, it's all just noise. It's all just stuff. But we got to bring it down into this realm, because we have physical bodies. Our ancestors, they can give us the guidance and the wisdom and the insights and the inspiration, but we have the privilege of being in a physical body to actually manifest in this realm, to do the things. So until we show up to do our part, there's all this potentiality that's just waiting there for us. So that's hopefully what doing these series and this activation can help you to do and to get there. So let's get into it. Let's get into these revolutionaries who had their own ways of doing things, but also very similar. Again, they were revolutionaries in different eras. So let's talk about Kwame Ture. As I mentioned, he was born Stokely Carmichael in 1941 in Trinidad, but he was raised in the Bronx. So he saw the oppression that our people were experiencing in multiple places, both in Trinidad and being in the Bronx and seeing the how our environments were shaped by this colonial rule and how anti-Black racism was really a contradiction to this idea of American democracy. He saw that firsthand. Now, at the time in Trinidad, Trinidad was a colony, a British colony at the time of his birth, and it was governed by, of course, these same white imperialist structure. And when his family migrated to the U.S. in the 1950s and settled in the Bronx, and as a teenager, he became very politically aware. He saw how Black people in the United States were free on paper, but subjected to the same structural oppression as colonized people were in other parts of the world. So he saw that at a very early age. And he was inspired by African liberation struggles, including Malcolm X, um, and the critiques around integration. And we've mentioned that, I've mentioned this in previous videos in the series, that integration and desegregation in some ways impacted us in very negative ways. We saw it as advancement, but we can definitely see where it impacted us negatively in some ways. But he was able to see that again at early age. And when he was a student, he at a college student at Howard University, and in 1961 he joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the acronym SNCC, you'll see that as you start to research and start to understand, because you should research. I'm giving you the tip of the iceberg in the series. If there's someone, an ancestor that really calls to you, you should go deep. You should do more research from vast different sources that are Black sources of truth, because for all of these people, there's multiple versions of the truth. And we all know the oppressor gets to write history, but there have been our scholars that have dived in deeper to really illuminate the truth for us. So I encourage you to dive in deeper and to gain the knowledge for yourself. But the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, is an organization that you want to look into and understand more about. So he joined that, and he also became a freedom writer. So at the time, SNCC was working alongside Dr. Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And this is where he really, Kwame, I'm going to call him by the name that he chose to call himself, even though at this time he was still Stokely Carmichael. He was, riding along with Dr. King and really understanding what it took to be a civil rights activist, and learning about this nonviolent movement. And he was inspired and continued to do that work. And then he became a freedom writer. And I mentioned them in Robert Williams' video yesterday, because he did some work helping to protect the freedom writers when they came to Monroe, where he lived, and there was a whole incident around that led him to being um, an FBI most wanted. But watch that video to learn more about that. But when Kwame became a freedom writer to resist this racial segregation, he was arrested. He was arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, and sent to this notorious Parchman Farm prison. So let me tell you about this prison, because this was a key turning point for him. Before this point, he had been learning and understanding and really intellectualizing and getting also involved, grassroots getting involved. But this was when he experienced true hardship. He experienced this farm, which was a state-run prison that was known for torturing Black inmates. And this is where they sent any civil rights activists that they could get their hands on. They sent them to this farm to try to break them. And his arrest was just a part of the strategy from white Southerns to break the spirit of young activists. But in this farm, they had forced labor, they beat them in just inhumane conditions. It literally was a continuation of slavery. And we all know from history of things, sharecropping, Jim Crow, all the things, it never really ended. They just transformed the way. But this prison didn't even really try to hide it. It truly was where he experienced some of the firsthand brutality um, of anti-Black racism and of white supremacy and the brutality that comes from that. They were treated like hardened criminals. They were stripped and beaten and placed in overcrowding cells with no beds. The guards taunted them and brutalized them and forced them to sing and beat them if they stopped singing. And while he was there, Kwame saw older Black prisoners and saw what they had been subjected to for decades and what it did to them and how it broke them and the psychological warfare that was happening in these prisons, again, to break us, to break the people who were trying to fight for our liberation and to really get this free labor as well. It was a multi-use facility, if you will, and how they did things. And this betrayal, because, and it was really, it felt like a betrayal to him because the United States government, definitely not the state government in Mississippi, no, none of these structures and entities that were supposed to be protecting the people protected them, protected us at all. And he saw that, and having endured that torture, it changed him, and it helped. It was part of what radicalized his approach from nonviolent to more of the Black power, and he continued to work and fight alongside Black activists, and was always targeted by FBI and local police. And that's part of the reason why I use the visuals that I used on the thumbnail, because as fighters for our liberation, they were viewed negatively by the government. I'll just say it like that. You get what that means. And so after his release from that prison, he continued his work with the activism, organizing voter registration drives in Alabama and Mississippi. And we already know we're going to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer tomorrow. Um, Voter registration, and even today, even now, the very um, our right to vote is under threat today with the current administration. And I do not think people really realize that, especially women. I mean, all of us, especially Black people, but especially women, all women, look into it, dive into it. I'm not doing that analysis here. There's people that are far better qualified to get into the political impact of what's happening. Follow Roland Martin. He's been having experts on his YouTube channel almost daily, really breaking this down, because we really need to understand what's coming for us right now and why it's so important that we tap into our ancestors, who were the ones who fought to get the amendments and the laws and the justice in place that we all live on now today, and all of that is being threatened. So we need to tap into these ancestors who were the ones who risked their lives, who whose lives were taken in order to put these things in place for us, and now they're on the line. So we need to understand and tap into that. So when by 1966, he was fully embracing this idea of Black power after witnessing all of the oppression from the state and federal and local levels, and all of the violence that was going unchecked and oftentimes rewarded. And he made this speech on June 16th, 1966, after he was released from jail once again. And he stood before a crowd of thousands and he declared, "We want Black power." And this was the first time there was a diversion away from "we want to integrate," or appealing to the morality of white people and the white supremacists, and just went the other way and said, "We just want Black power. We need our own. We need economic sovereignty. We need our own political structures. We need to take care of ourselves and really stand on business with who we are as a Black people and focus that." And that word, those words, Black power, that speech became a rallying cry, and where there was a shift, or rather an expansion of the civil rights movement, and we really began to look at, some continued with the integration and the nonviolence, but there became a huge movement around, we just need to take care of ourselves and we have power. We have pride in who we are. That was an incredible turning moment. And he pushed SNCC away from being this interracial organizing organization. He told the white people, I'm sorry, but y'all got to go. This is about black people. We need to do black people things. They were no longer invited to the picnic, and he kept it moving. And we thank him for that, because that gave us another way, just like Robert Williams yesterday with the armed self-defense approach alongside the nonviolence approach. Kwame gave us a way to look at ourselves and begin to have pride in ourselves and knowing we didn't have to placate to the dominant white supremacist culture in order to know we had value, in order to know who we were, in order to know that we have power. Black power is ingrained within us. And so we thank him for that. We give thanks and honor to Kwame Ture. And then let's talk about Mr. Tupac Shakur. And I smile because, you know, I grew up with Tupac, not with Tupac, but, listening to his music, and we have the same generation. So I have a connection to his work and his words. And so that's why that loving smile. Plus, he was just so dope. And so he was born. It's funny. He was born, what is that, 30 years later exactly? Now, he was born 1971, and his mother, Afeni Shakur, was a prominent Black Panther. So he grew up saturated in Black revolutionary ideas. So while he was not of the same generation as Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael, his mother was. His mother was of that same vein of Black power. So that's what he grew up with. That's what he was indoctrinated with. And I think is there an African proverb or just an African American proverb, or am I making it up? That as you educate a Black mother, so should her children will be. I'm screwing up that quote, but the point is she had that knowledge and she passed it to her child. And that's much of the way it works in our communities. If the mother has a certain level of education or knowledge, that's passed to the children. Not to say that the father doesn't have an impact, as we saw yesterday with Robert F. Williams. His grandfather had a huge impact on him and his stance around we don't have to bow down. So it's a group effort, but in Tupac's case, he was raised by his mother. So that was the influence that he had. Um, and he saw the horrible realities in the 80s and 90s of police brutality in our neighborhoods and in our communities, and the so-called war on drugs, which was just a moniker for the war on Black people, the war on our communities, the war on Black men and women, but they were really targeting Black men and families at the time. And he saw that. He saw the mass incarceration of our Black communities. And if we think about the things that the environment that he grew up in and what he saw, one, he already had the foundation to look through at things through a critical lens. This was part of what his mother taught him, as she was a Black Panther. She was one of, I think, the Panther 21 that was identified and wrongfully accused of inciting violence. And eventually she had to exile to Cuba as well. But he had that foundation, and then actually experiencing it, seeing it all around him. So he knew the history, and then seeing it replay itself in his own lifetime, that also radicalized him. And I use that word radicalized, meaning he wanted to divert away from what was the norm and find a different way to get our people free. And he himself was brutally assaulted by Oakland police in 1991. So let's talk about that for a quick second. Um, he was walking across the street in Oakland, supposedly jaywalking, which was just crossing the street, not at a cross stop. That's barely a thing to stop someone for, let alone do the things that were done for him. So they immediately rode up on him. Witnesses say that he was calm and he was compliant, but the officers escalated the situation without provocation. They were looking to harass someone, or him in particular, because he was already an artist at this time. He was already speaking out against the things that he was saying. So they may have already known who he was, but they punched him, they choked him, they slammed his head against the concrete. They treated him like a violent criminal when all that man did was, again, minding his own Black life, crossing the street. Just like Black Wall Street, they was minding their own Black life and got militarily attacked with aerial assaults and mobs and looted and all the things. Again, minding our own Black lives and get attacked brutally. And they continued to punch him and kick him even after he was on the ground and restrained. And clearly, it was not about force and law. It wasn't the thing he did, jaywalking. I don't even. That is not a crime, and for damn sure not for what they did. It was racially motivated. Period. And the fact after all of that, after the hauling him in, they didn't even charge him with anything. That's how you know there was no reason for all of it except for this is what they wanted to do. That same scene could have been replayed in every decade for the last 100 years. Only a few decades earlier, or maybe 100 years earlier, closer to slavery or in Jim Crow, they wouldn't have been able to do it and literally kill him in broad daylight and no one did anything. And then they would have played with his body. This is what they did to us. And this is what was still happening. This is what he saw. So knowing that history and then seeing it all around him and then experiencing it for himself, he put all of that into his music and he exposed how mass incarceration functioned as modern day slavery. And he exposed all of these atrocities that were happening all around us in his music. The idea is that they were both resisting. Kwame Ture resisted the idea that integration and moral appeals to white America could liberate people, and Tupac resisted the criminalization of our culture and of Black people and the police occupation of Black neighborhoods. And that is a very different way to think about what happens in our neighborhoods and our communities. Police occupation. It's the same of military being in other countries occupying those spaces and colonizing those spaces with the military support. In the United States, they just use the police officers for it, the police departments for it. And we already know these last few years from George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and even just less than a year ago with Sonia Massey. This is still an issue. So let's keep it moving. So what were their acts of resistance? How did they actually, in their own ways, having similar struggles, again, different time periods and two paths, but how did they actually move forward? And so Kwame, his was these last mass movements. He led these, and as I mentioned, he shifted the civil rights movement to a more radical liberation stance, thinking about Black political self-determination. And with Tupac, he used hip hop as a weapon of resistance. He used his music, his poetry, because if you're not familiar with his work, definitely dive into to Tupac. The media has portrayed as this idea of just gangster rap, but he truly was a poet and an intellectual thinker. And to be clear, he was a funny party boy as well. Like we're all the things. That's just who we are. And so when you dive into his work and his music, he truly was a poet. Not only his lyrics that he rhymed over, but there was a lot of poetry that he wrote that was never necessarily turned into music. And he also spoke publicly and used his access to the media to speak blatantly and to uplift. So he exposed what he was seeing and he uplifted his Black people as he spoke and as he did his work. And so together they both use different types of platforms, but they use their voices. They use the power of their words to both expose the truth and to uplift their people. They did both, but again, with their words in different ways. And so Kwame, he turned that Black power into an international rallying cry. Because it's Black power, this idea of being Black before they decided that we were African American and then continuously diluted the label. Black is something that can apply to people whether you are in the diaspora in the Caribbean, in England, anywhere that we show up in the world, Black is Black. But when you start saying African American, that starts to divide it up a little bit more. Think about that as something to integrate into your philosophy and how we look at things and why those transitions happen. But again, Kwame looked at Black power and used that as our rallying cry, and it continues today. You see me doing this because this is still it's the symbol for it. It's Black power. And then what few people knew, and I'll admit, maybe I knew it back at the time, but I didn't remember it now, that Thug Life was an acronym for the hate you give, Little infants fucks everybody. So hating black people from birth screws up humanity, takes us all off path, integrates and inputs a level of hate that is unnecessary. It fucks everybody. That child, their entire life, because they have grown up and been born into a society that hates them for no reason. And you never get to see and experience the brilliance of those people, of these children who are hated before they were even born simply because they are Black children. So the hate you give little infants fucks everybody. Thug life. And he had that tatted on his chest or his stomach. I think it was his stomach. But that was a philosophy um, that he used to explain how systemic oppression fuels these cycles of violence and poverty. And he advocated for street codes. Listen to this. He advocated for street codes that encourage unity. So while there was all of this, gang fights and gang battles, especially during that time, he was advocating and trying to broker peace. Because while we fighting each other, the actual oppressor, the ones that we should be fighting, the ones that if we were tap into Robert Williams insight that we talked about yesterday, all of that training would be focused in protecting our people, not fighting against each other. And so that was part of what Tupac was about uniting our communities, uniting Black men. And what was interesting about him is that his message was able to reach people on the street who were in the gangs, who were doing all of the things, who were being targeted, as well as the Black men in prison. That was a powerful platform that he had, and it was authentic. Wasn't nobody questioning whether he was real. He wasn't no Drake situation, you know what I'm saying? It was not that. And so Black Power and Thug Life, as these mantras, as these philosophies, they both stood on business with and moved forward with and helped our people and helped us to go forward. And then Kwame, he built these sustainable grassroots resistance movements, things that went beyond, oh, we're just going to protest this thing in this moment in time. He had long-term strategies that would get implemented over time that looked to use different strategies and different methods at different points in times to put pressure or to help us to extract or to help us to galvanize our political strength and our political power. And he did it through the people. He did it, both using the platforms when he spoke, but the actual work was grassroots and bringing people together and using these organized approaches. And then Tupac used his platform in mass media. I mean, you can Google and go on YouTube now and see a lot of the interviews that he did and really listen to this man articulate what was happening in our world, what was happening in our communities, and at the same time articulate the anger and frustration and give voice to our communities, give voice to the youth, give voice to the Black men who are being targeted in a way that they couldn't. So he served as a mouthpiece for those who were disenfranchised, who had been silenced or had been locked away, and those who have been murdered or unalived. I've already used the word, whatever, but who have already been taken away from us. And spreading those revolutionary ideas was massive. Millions of people could hear what he had to say. And he talked about the police violence. It wasn't like he was making it up. He was bringing voice to it and bringing focus on it. And they just tried to position him as a gangster rap and we're always targeting him just like they were always targeting Kwame Ture as well. But again, one struggle, two different time periods, similar methodologies, um, and two different paths, and using different techniques and different strategies along the way. So when we think about how did they maintain their strength, because life was not easy for either of them, from youth all the way through to their end. Kwame got to live a longer life than Tupac did, but life wasn't easy. How did they endure? Because that's one of the other things we need to be able to tap into and understand from our ancestors. This shit wasn't easy. They were getting attacked constantly, physically, having opportunity, like everything was coming for them. But they remained steadfast. They continued to do the work again that they knew that they were here to do. And I say again because with everyone that we've talked about since we moved into community ancestors, that resilience that we have is not just about enduring oppression. It's about the resiliency to fight oppression, the resiliency to go after our liberation in the way that is unique to you, no matter what's happening and what's coming for us. That is resilience. Got me hyped. Let me knocking off my headset. All right, let me come back to it. So what did they? How did they do that? Okay, so they both had this unshakable belief in Black self-determination, and the self-determination part, I would say, is more of a Kwame Ture point of view. But with Tupac, it was more around knowing that we had of who we are. But they both had this belief that Black self-determination and of who we were. And then for Tupac, it was this power of art and community and the next generation, and even looking beyond the next generation of, or prior to the next generation, and knowing the legacy that he came from. And there was a certain part of him, and you'll hear it in some of his writing, that he did not necessarily think he was going to live indefinitely. And so he put it all on the line. It was almost as if he knew he had a calling to make impact that he could make and to do what he could do, because he knew he wasn't going to be here for long. But he believed in that, and the power of art to be a healing mechanism, the power of art and the power of words rhythmically set, the power of poetry. All of this is what gave him strength. And then they both found strength in this collective struggle. And this international solidarity is what Kwame brought into it. And then that revolutionary lineage, they both looked at that, because Kwame understood who he came from. He understood who his people were, just as Tupac did. And only for Tupac, it was a little bit more front and center because of who his mother was. So he was very clear on the lineage and what the Black Panther Party meant and what revolutionary ideas actually were. And they both, as well as Robert F. Williams yesterday, had a profound love for Black people, for our people, for their community. So everything they did, every word they spoke, this is truly where the resiliency came from, their love for Black people. This is what fueled everything. This was the foundation for everything. All those different aspects that I just talked about sat on top of this foundation of pure love. Love can get you through some things. Love can have you doing some things that you'll be like, this is hard, but I got to do it. This is hard, but I have no choice. I got to show up because of the love. That's what will fuel you. And that's what fueled them. So let's talk a little bit more about how their work shaped the legacies that we have today. As soon as I can find my notes, I had so much. Oh, I think I may have skipped something. Oh, let me go back for a quick second before I go into that. So this national, actually it's relevant here, this Pan-Africanism that's central to Black liberation. This is what Tore's perspective was about. And so he was inspired by the Pan-African revolutions of the 1960s and 70s. And again, these are things to dive into, because the 60s and 70s was not that long ago, and we're living in the continuation of that history. And so Ghana was the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain their independence. And the leader of that, the Ghanaian leader um, that helped set off that wave of anti-colonial movements. I'm not going to butcher his last name, but his first name was Kwame, and that's he in honor of him as one of the reasons why Kwame or Stokely Carmichael changed his name to Kwame in honor of this particular leader. Once I learn how to say his last name, maybe I'll come back and say it just for kicks and giggles. Um, and he promoted Pan-Africanism, and his vision directly affected Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael. And then the Algerian War of Independence happened, where there was an armed struggle against French colonization. And in the Congo, they gained independence, and then Patrice, excuse me, y'all. Patrice Lumumba was the first prime minister, and then was targeted by the US and the Belgium to assassinate him in 1961. And then there was Mozambique, Angola, and Guinea that had their armed struggles against Portugal. So all of these things were impacting and happening at the same time. And I think it's important to understand the broader global picture. The 60s and 70s, when Black Power was really a huge focus, civil rights, which, mind you, the Civil Rights Act that was put into place in the 60s is now on the table and is at risk. So the things that these people fought for, all these people, both the non-violent side and the more militant radical side, everything that they fought for is on the table now and is at risk. We need to show up. We need to tap in. So when Torre made this call for Black power and transformed the civil rights movement, it became central to this whole idea of Pan-Africanism. It became a part of that movement. And it laid the foundation for modern Black radicalism. And I don't even want to use that word because it's been demonized. But, you know, if that's what it takes to stoke, no pun intended, but to stoke the fire within us, so be it. But we can think of some other words for it as well. But the idea is global resistance. And his politics and his point of view is often erased or minimized when we look at history. Again, there's these attempts to erase our history now, and it's already been to some extent watered from the mainstream civil rights history. Now, Tupac, again, his music and his activism, he gave voice to our struggles. He gave voice to people whose voice had been, you know, pretty much taken away from them, and enabled them to see themselves reflected and to see it in the context and understand what was happening to them. And he gave voice to these criminalized communities and the realities of the systemic oppression. Now, his political messages live on today in our hip hop culture. Listen to, and everybody is listening to. You can't ignore Kendrick Lamar, who also grew up and is from the same area. And Kendrick Lamar has been known to mention and talk about how he was influenced and even referenced Tupac in some of his work. So he has taken that mantle from Tupac and taken it further. And again, brilliant strategist, brilliant thinker, critical thinker, but also is a beautiful lyricist. Can put together some words, which really is poetry. And those political messages live on. And then same as these Kwame Ture's efforts have been erased or minimized, Tupac's messages have been just relegated to just gangster rap or a criminal or something that would just remove who he truly was, which was a political activist who used the microphone as one of his platforms and weapons, if you will. I mean, he also had other weapons too. There was a situation in Atlanta where actually, I was in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta at college in Clark Atlanta University when this happened, and he had just performed at Clark University. And I swear, I'm trying to remember. I don't think I went to that performance, but maybe I was in the vicinity of it, whatever. But he saw some motorists getting harassed by two white guys and stopped to say if everything was okay. A white guy pulls out their gun, turns out they're undercover police officers, so they start having a shootout. And at the end of the day, what it turns out is that not only were the undercover police officers actually were harassing somebody, but they were using guns that they took from the evidence locker, so they were completely wrong and actually um, and he was in the right for defending themselves because they never even identified themselves, nor were they even on duty. And like we said, they were just being shady. And so he was not afraid to use whatever weapon he needed to defend his people. And he stepped into that situation that didn't even have anything to do with him. He just saw somebody that needed help. That was all over the news, and the whole Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta was locked down. So when we think about the legacy and impact that they have for us. Kwame was about this, with the message for him, from him, the wisdom from him at a high level was that long-term commitment, discipline, and collective action is going to be critical for our liberation. And his point of view is that we got to organize ourselves and speak from a position of strength and stop begging people to look kindly upon us. Now, understand there's multiple components to that. We got to organize ourselves. We can't have all these different things happening. And in fighting, we need to be organized and unified. It doesn't all have to be the same method. We had nonviolence, we had radical approaches, but they all had the same end. So we have to organize ourselves so that we speak from a position of power and a position of strength. And in order to do that, we got to know what strengths we actually have and have a strategy and a disciplined way of approaching it so that as one gets impacted, the other part can come and support it. These are all of the strategies and things that they taught us and our ancestors taught us. And again, Robert F. Kwame and Tupac, these are all the components of it. And so when we think about the wisdom and how do we apply these things today, we need to prioritize our economic autonomy, the local governance and political education. We need to understand what we're living in. We need to understand the rights that are slowly either being taken away, have been recently taken away, or are on the table and um, are being threatened right now. We have to understand what the amendments are. We hear the words being thrown around, the 14th Amendment on the table. We have the Second Amendment. Understand what the amendments are, what rights they actually give us. Understand what the Civil Rights Act actually is and the rights that it gives us. Understand our voting rights. Understand all of these things that are now being challenged. And literally in our lifetime, those rights could be taken away and our children be living in the same time period, the same type of experience that our ancestors were living in the Jim Crow time period. We are the ancestors of the future. How do we stand now? What do we do now to create a future for them that's better than the ones that our ancestors created for us? Because we're at a pivotal point right now. And so Kwame's wisdom and how we can apply it today, again, prioritize economic autonomy, local governance, and political education. And so we need to look at joining political organizations. We need to look at creating political or Black-led organizations. It doesn't have to be political. We have a plethora of nonprofits that are Black-led and Black benefiting, and those two need to come together. We need Black people determining what the mission statements are, what the goals are, what the strategies are of the nonprofits that are doing work in our communities to help and uplift and to better our people, not someone else coming in and telling us what they think we need and then all of the funding going to those organizations. We need to fund our Black-led, Black benefiting nonprofit and political organizations. Dig into it, look into it. There are ones that exist already, or it might be time for you to step up and create one. Either way, join them or start them as a part of the mission of what we can do. And then the other part is that again, study the Pan-Africanism and the anti-colonial movements. Understand, how did Ghana gain their independence? No, we are not a separate nation. We are here within the United States, but clearly there's a level of liberation that needs to take place. Study what's happened in these other places. Study and understand the leaders like we're doing in this series, but go beyond the series and go deeper so we can really understand how do we move forward. What can we learn from the past, especially since they're trying to take away the books? They're trying to take away this education, the little bit of education that exists in our American educational system, the little bit of Black history, the little bit of truth that exists in it. They're trying to take that away and reposition it. But we actually need to go further. We need to go deeper and understand who and what we come from. And that's part of what how we can apply what Kwame Ture has left for us. And then shifting from this individualistic activism to collective liberation. And this goes back to that organizing so that we can speak from a position of strength and power. We need to come together and stop the infighting, which is a part of what we've come from and a part of what was done and a part of the trauma that we are living through and trying to navigate from, but it's part of what needs to change in terms of us coming together and really organizing. If there was one word to break down all of what Kwame Ture has left for us and how we can apply it, is organizing. And look at that from not just the textbook definition or the dictionary definition of what it means to organize, like organizing your shelves, but organizing as a people. That's part of what the legacy he's left behind for us. And for Tupac, His main message would have been, um, his wisdom would have been, use your talent, your voice, and your platform for radical truth telling. Tell the truth. You don't need to water it down. You need to wash it down. Tell the truth. Whatever platform you have, and we see it happening on social media, even with their, the algorithms that will ban or shadow ban or make sure they suppress messages. There's more social media platforms that are popping up. We got fan base, black owned. We got spill, black owned. um, Blue Sky is not black owned, but it has a different approach. We have a lot of different sources. Substack, a lot of content creators who are more liberatory, who are more on this path, are going to Substack. We have places where we can tap in and get the information, and people are using their platforms to do just that. And that's what he talked about. And his main message is the hate you give little infants fucks everybody, thug life. And I think he would say we all need to be living that thug life philosophy in exposing harmful actions that are happening in our communities and uplifting our people, knowing that we have to create a world for the youth, for children to be able to have pride in themselves and to live a life and to thrive. And the way we can apply the wisdom that Tupac left for us is to leverage media, culture, and storytelling as revolutionary tools, especially in this digital age. And I emphasize storytelling because that's ancestral. All of what we have maintained from the Middle Passage, from our culture, from different aspects of who we are, has been from storytelling. We know we come from a people with oral traditions. So being able to share who we are, being able to share stories from our own lineages, we talked about storytelling during a whole session in week one in talking about our own sacred lineages, our family, our people, our blood relatives. Storytelling is a key part of that. And that is what Tupac is saying. Use your gift of storytelling in whatever way you can to tell the truth, to be radical about speaking the truth about what you're seeing. And later on, we'll talk about this week, we'll go into Ida B. Wells, who did a very similar thing using the power of her pen, her words, written words, to speak the truth about what was happening in terms of lynchings and the lies that were being told to justify the lynching. She spoke the truth. So for Tupac, make your art, your business, or your work a tool for liberation. Integrate it. It's not something separate. We are no longer in a space where you can have a life over here that's about getting your bag and your life over here that's about liberation. Or maybe you wind up ignoring the liberation part and just focusing on the bag, which I believe is what's happened over the last few generations or decades or so. But focus on a way, how can you integrate the two? How can you sustain yourself? Use the things that we learned last week in Sacred Shields in terms of economic stability and economic power and economic sovereignty and entrepreneurship. How can you use all those concepts and also leverage that platform, leverage your business and your tools, or leverage your tools as a way to empower people and to go after liberation, to inspire liberation? And then don't be afraid to challenge power. This is another insight that we can apply today that Tupac Shakur lived. Now, it can be a little scary because ultimately he was unalived and they still, quote unquote, don't know who did it. His case is unsolved. There's a lot of speculation about many different ways that it happened. I suspect it's probably a combination of things, just like it was a combination of things with Malcolm X. Internal betrayal, but really orchestrated by forces who wanted to silence him. Because the impact, again, that he was having with our incarcerated Black men and our inner cities, the so called ghettos, the impact he was having there was definitely, could have definitely taken us far. And that's something that they wanted to stop. But the point is not to be afraid. You can still be strategic. You can still move forward and not be afraid. Because here's the thing, we can be afraid and still lose our lives. We can be afraid and don't do anything and still have the same impact that we could have had or would have had we actually stood up. And there's a number of our freedom fighters, as I was doing this research, that had this philosophy. if I'm gonna lose my life, I'm gonna lose my life standing for something. Nothing is guaranteed. So to actually try to stay safe out of fear by not speaking up, by not challenging the power structures right now, it's not a guarantee of safety. It's not a guarantee that you're going to live to fight another day. Yes, be strategic. Yes, understand the risk that you are taking, but know that you cannot have fear. And you got to do what you're here to do because you are that ancestor of the future. And looking back, are they going to say they fought for us? They fought to make sure that we were able to maintain some of the progress that their ancestors created for them? Did they do the work in 2025 to secure that for us? Don't be afraid. And to pour into that next generation so that this basically flows from what I just said, that what are we doing now to dismantle these structures, these oppressive structures, to secure again what progress was made, and to continue to dismantle these oppressive structures so that our great grandchildren can actually be free, can actually be liberated. How can we do that? How can we implore whatever gifts and talents and strengths and platforms or businesses or tools or education or insights? What are the unique gifts and talents? Go back to that video from week 1 of connecting with your higher self, connecting with your ancestors to tap into the unique gifts and talents that you've inherited that are there latent, waiting for you to activate them. What are those unique gifts and talents that you can use and apply to our liberation? Because there's a reason you're here. We need you. We need whatever it is you brought here with you to give. We need that special, unique gift that is you, the fully realized, authentic, healed you. And we need you to show up unafraid in community, doing what you can individually do, but doing it a part of an organized effort for our liberation. So we got through it, y'all, in a little less than an hour. We was riding. And one thing I forgot to mention at the top that I'll mention now is I am recording a meditation, a guided meditation that can help us to embody sacred resistance as a whole. So rather than do a meditation after every ancestor or set of ancestors that we work with this week during sacred resistance, did I say sacred resistance before? I'm doing a single video for sacred resistance. I don't know what I said. And so rather than doing one for every, at the end of every session this week, I'm going to record one that's a little bit more extended. Maybe it'll be, a little less than, it'll be less than 20 minutes. Because resistance and how we go about resistance is very personal, is very based on what you have the capacity to do and what your gifts and talents are. And this week, yesterday, we're going through different ways that some collective community ancestors have gone after liberation and have resisted. Yesterday, we talked about Robert F. Williams and his armed self-defense resistance. Today, we're talking about the power of the spoken word with Kwame and Tupac. And then I'm going to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, who spoke as well, but also she used different forms of resistance. So we're going to go through this week and highlighting all these different ways that we can resist. But this meditation that I'll post, I did say it was going to be within the next 24 hours, but honey, I needed to rest yesterday. But I'll get that up soon. Let me stop putting a time frame on it. But I'll get that up soon this week so that you can use these videos to learn and then go back to that guided meditation when you really want to embody it. Because I think it's important to work with both your intellectual piece of your part of your mind and get this information and look at it for yourself, understand how it impacts you in particular. When we talk about the ways you can impact it today, you can use it and make it relevant for today. And then go into that meditation to really center yourself and calm yourself, to really connect in with yourself and to connect in with that message and allowing that way of resistance that's unique to you to blossom out of that. So that's what that will be about. But for today, we're going to wrap it up. I will have us take a few deep breaths because it's been a lot of information and I want you to So much information. I choked earlier. Sorry, y'all. But a lot of information. So I think it's important that we take some deep breaths together and settle in and settle down and give thanks to Kwame Ture, born Stokely Carmichael, and give thanks to Tupac Shakur, born Tupac Shakur, and give thanks to both their mothers and their ancestors' ancestors who gave them the courage and the love, which is critical, to do what they did. Love, courage, action. What I'm finding through all of these so far is that, and actually all of them, because I've looked ahead at the week, obviously. Love, courage, action is the foundation of sacred resistance. And all of these ancestors, Kwame Ture, Tupac Shakur, we give you thanks. All of the ancestors that we're talking about this week have found ways to love, courage, action, to exemplify that in their own ways. So we give thanks and we honor them by finding ways to implement their wisdom in our own lives, in our day to day, in the work that we do. And with that, let's take a deep breath together. Hold and release. And we take a deep breath. Hold and release. And our last one, inhale deeply. Inhale love, courage, and action. Let it saturate you. And exhale fear and apathy. And with that, I give you thanks. Have a beautiful rest of your Sunday on this self-love weekend, and take good care.